So thanks everyone for joining us today. I am Taryn Jones, part of the developer marketing team here at Kong, and I want to welcome you to Tech Talks by Kong. Tech Talks are a new webinar series dedicated to our technical developer audience, featuring open source products and topics relevant to you with extended live demos. At the end of the presentation, we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. Please feel free to use the chat function throughout, but if you have any questions for the presenters, please enter them using the Q&A button that's on your Zoom toolbar. That way we don't lose track of them in the chat. All right, let's go ahead and get started. For this Tech Talk, Wills and Philippe from the Kong Insomnia team are going to talk about Insomnia.rest, our open source API design and testing platform, the new Git Sync experience, and what's coming next. And of course, we'll feature a demo for a large portion of the presentation, so don't worry about that. So with that, I will hand it over to Wills to get this party started. Thank you, Wills.
Thank you, Taryn. Hi, everybody. My name is Wills Dawson. I'm a principal product manager here at Kong. I'm focused on the Insomnia product. So really excited to be here today with you. I'm in San Francisco. You might hear some slight hammering coming from my upstairs neighbors. Always stuff being built, I suppose. So let's dive in. So we've got a pretty brief agenda for you today. We're going to talk about some recent releases that we have done for Insomnia. We're going to deep dive into Git Sync and what that is. And Philippe will come on to do the demo. As Taryn said, that will probably be the majority of the time, so you won't have to look at slides for too long. But then I'll come back and touch on some of the stuff that's coming soon and that's on our roadmap, and then we'll take some questions towards the end. All right, so digging into recent releases. We, in 2022.1, which we released in February this year, it was our first release of 2022, we released a feature that was related to smooth onboarding. So some of the pain that we saw from our users using Insomnia before this change was it took 7 or more clicks or screens to get to a send request action in Insomnia, which is kind of by far the most popular use case for Insomnia is sending requests. You know, we support REST, GraphQL, gRPC, and there were a lot of confusing zero-state screens along the way. As you kind of first launched the app, it was very confusing where to go, how to get started if you wanted to do something with Insomnia. It was really hard to get to that aha moment of, okay, this thing is useful for me. So we wanted to smooth that out, make it really simple, kind of get back to the roots of Insomnia, of that simplicity. So we reduced the clicks to send a request from first launch down to 2 clicks, and one of those is clicking the send button. And we pre-created a bunch of objects for that first launch as well. So you don't have to go create request objects or collections or things like that. We just drop you right into the action. We enhanced the zero-state screens, provide a lot more guidance, links to documentation, hotkeys, things like that. And we also improved the discoverability of other features like the OpenAPI spec builder and designer, as well as the testing features that we have in Insomnia. So some other recent improvements that we did also in 2022.1, we added native support for Apple Silicon. This was largely due to upgrading a lot of other dependencies, but you no longer need to use Rosetta to use Insomnia. In 2022.2, we upgraded to Electron 17. So this was the first time in a while that we were using a stable and supported version of Electron, which we're really excited about. This leads to a lot of better maintainability, not just for the features of Electron and Chromium, but also a lot of other dependencies as well that are using an updated version of Node and all of those types of things. This also let us actually release a fix for the Chromium security issue that happened, I believe, last month. And then in 2022.3, which is in beta currently, and we're looking to release to GA, to production in next week, I believe. But currently in the beta, we support OpenAPI 3.0.3, which is the latest patch version for the 3.0 chain. There is an OpenAPI 3.1 release as well, which actually is a breaking change. The OpenAPI, they dropped support for Semver with that change. So there are breaking changes in 3.1. but most of them are due to JSON schema types of things and are fairly minor. But we're continuing to monitor the adoption of 3.1. There are definitely some tools that are out there that have support for this already, but others are still trying to catch up, and some of our dependencies are actually still trying to catch up as well. So we're continuing to monitor the adoption of that and want to get that out as soon as we can. So something else that's coming up in 2022.3 is Git Sync. So let's dive into that as well. And first I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the problem that we're trying to solve with Git Sync. So Git is a great collaboration mechanism today. You can use Git Sync in Insomnia today. It's a familiar tool for team members. You can leverage existing sources of truth and where your code lives and where the sensitive data lives. You can have the requests and specs and tests that you build in Insomnia live alongside or close to the code or implementation of your APIs. And with that comes, like, your versioning is kept in sync as well. The version of these specs or tests or requests can be kept in sync with the implementation of that API as well. So it's some really useful things that you get from using Git Sync. But Insomnia's feature right now is pretty hard to use and even just to set up. So for example, the authentication token that you see here, it's sort of daunting. It's kind of like hey, what is this thing? And I used to work at Okta before I came to Kong, so I even know a good amount about authentication, and it's still kind of daunting, even just thinking about how to go about creating one and things like that. And then even smaller things like, hey, what's the difference between author name and username can be kind of confusing if you don't really deeply know about that Git operation and how authors work. And we see this kind of problems in the data as well. So these are three of the top errors that we see in Insomnia's Git operations, which we get from the telemetry. And for those of you that choose to share usage data with us, again, all of that is anonymized, but we see some really useful things like this to let us know where you're struggling. And we see that, okay, there's some unauthorized errors and authorization required types of things, and that's leading and stemming from this ability of this friction of the Git Sync setup flow. So we'll come back to the merges with conflicts are not supported error as well. So file that one away. We'll come back to that towards the end of the presentation. But the setup again is really challenging. So what are we doing to address this? Well, in this beta of 2022.3, in that version of Insomnia, we are improving setup for Git Sync. And we're leveraging modern access patterns to improve the UX and the security of this. So the OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect flows specifically are what we're going to leverage that will help us get to all of these providers. We're starting with GitHub for this release, as it's the most popular one that we have and integrate with right now. But we want to get to all of these in the future, and we'll be able to do that with this architecture. But it leads to a familiar authentication pattern for users, the token granting, or that authentication token that you saw previously. Instead of manually creating that, copy pasting it into Insomnia, it's generating that as automated. It's way more secure, and things like that. And rather than continuing to blabber on about this, I want to turn it over to Philippe, who's going to help us understand this with the demo. So Philippe.
Hey folks, I'm Philippe. I'm talking to you from Portugal. I work as a test engineer with the Insomnia team. So, and like Will mentioned, I'm going to be demoing a few things regarding Git Sync for Insomnia. So let me go ahead and share my my screen. You folks let me know. Can you see my screen all right? Thumbs up? Yeah, all right, cool. So the first thing that I want to go through is when you boot up Insomnia and you've been working on some design documents and some collections and whatnot, there comes a point in time where, for instance, it might be the case that you have your typical request collection that you're building out, and this is like the simplest case. We're not even going to the point of we have an open API spec and whatnot. I'm just exploring an API, putting out here requests and whatnot, and I might be adding even a few unit checks for the requests that I define on my collection. Now, like Will's mentioned, the old way of doing this, if I wanted to, place this that is right now on my local Insomnia instance, if I wanted to put this out and sync it with Git, the old way of doing this is I would have to create a blank repository, of course. I would have to set this name and email and username. I would have to set up a personal access token for my Git repo and whatnot. And like was mentioned, one of the things that we've been working on is to make this more modern, so to speak. And we started. I'm using right now the beta. It's still not out. This beta it's going to be out today, where we can sync in a more user-friendly way with GitHub, so to speak. So let's go ahead and do just that. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and authenticate with GitHub. And right now I have a window that opened up asking me to connect Insomnia with GitHub. I'm going to go ahead and click continue. And it's asking me to give some permissions and whatnot. This is fairly standard. Like if you link, for instance, your GitHub account with VS Code, you would get a similar kind of authorization request. I'm going to go ahead and press authorize. And in a few seconds, I should be able to see there, as you can see, I'm linked. So what this means is I can configure any GitHub repository that I have access to on GitHub. For instance, this collection that I'm working on, I don't have any repos. So let's go ahead and create one. Let me go ahead and open up the create a new repo on GitHub. Let's name this one as Tech Talk Insomnia. We'll give it an example description. You can do this both for public and private repositories. It should work the same. And at the end of the day, if you want to collaborate, on an Insomnia collection, so to speak, it's similar to how you would collaborate, checking out a repository and editing on VS Code and whatnot. Let's go ahead and make it public. For now, we can leave these things as is. And we have a brand new blank repository. So I could just come in here, copy this link for this repo, go back to Insomnia, and let's put it here, done. And as of now, we've done the first step of making the design document linked more or less with Git, but of course, we still need to, as in any repository, we need to commit our changes. And in this case, for instance, because the repository is completely blank, we're going to go ahead and commit all of these changes that I have on my local Insomnia project. So let's go ahead and say this is an initial commit. And we're going to go ahead and commit. And similarly, as any Git project, I would need to push to the main branch. And it's pushed, so I should be able to, if I go back to the Git repo, I should be able to see it here and notice there that I have an Insomnia folder with the needed files for Insomnia workspace, so to speak. All right, so this is the simplest case. Let's go to a bit more complex case, so to speak. Let's say that at one point, you're working on an API. I've been working on an API for a new dinosaur park, patent pending, so to speak. And I have my API spec defined and whatnot, and I've been collaborating on this repository for an Insomnia and whatnot. So I want to go ahead and import this into Insomnia. Similarly to before, it's already existing here. I can copy paste the link to clone. And let's go ahead here and create, and I'm going to import from a Git clone. And notice here that I don't have to fill out any of this information. I can just paste the URL of the repository because it's already synced with my GitHub account. And I should be able to see that Insomnia project here on my Insomnia local instance. Workspace Dino Park found in the repository would like to import. Let's go ahead and import. And as you can see, now this is it's imported the project, and this is more of a typical project if you're using, for example, Insomnia with Kong Gateway, and you're here, for example, I'm defining my API spec in OpenAPI version 3. And we have a bunch of endpoints, so to speak, that we can test out locally, so to speak. And for instance, in this case, I want to, for instance, my requests to go through Kong gateway. So for instance, I have a Kong gateway instance running locally on my machine. Let's go ahead and ping it to see if I can access it. And it should tell me that, yep, it's successfully connected to the Kong gateway instance that I have. So if I pick similarly to what you would do, going through requests, if I want to use the Kong gateway environment and I send a request, I should be able, to send requests typically, and the same for running unit checks and whatnot. Now, let's complicate this a bit further. Let's say that, while I'm working on my spec and whatnot, I want to go ahead and add a new endpoint. Now, there's a couple of steps that we would need to take. Now, first things first, we would need to edit the spec here. I already have prepared the chunk of code that I want to add, but even before that, think of it as you're working on a Git repo, right? So let's go ahead and create a separate branch for this. I'm adding an endpoint for the security, for controlling the security fences of my dinosaur park. So add security fences endpoint. And we're going to go ahead and create that branch on Git. And it's already, notice that it's already checked out here locally, so I can start safely, doing changes here on my spec and on my Insomnia repository. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste, I already have this code ready, so I'm going to go ahead and paste it here on the path. So I want to add a new path, a new endpoint. Let's go ahead and do it. I'll, of course, copy paste indentation. I have to fix this. And duplicate key post. Oh, snap. Oh, okay. I pasted it in the wrong section. Sorry, because this post is already belonging here to the dinosaurs endpoint, which we don't want to edit. It's its own endpoint. So let's go ahead and paste the security fences. Notice here that it's already, updating the typical Swagger like preview, so I can check, info that I'm coding up here. I should be able to see it also added here. And it's a brand new endpoint that I found on the spec. Now notice one thing that is, of course, I haven't updated my Kong gateway configuration to include this endpoint. So of course, even if I add, for example, a new test, let's check returns 200. And I pick, for instance, the turn on and off electricity of the fences of my Dino Park, it should fail. So if I run all the tests of my endpoints, this one should fail. Now, typically, in this case, while not Git Sync related, but how you would approach this, if you were in a typical Kong gateway workflow using Insomnia, you would go ahead here and, for instance, create a declarative config. I'm going to go ahead and copy paste it because this is updated from the spec here and generated there. I'm going to go back to the my repo there. I have there my Kong declarative config. I'm going to go ahead and update it. And I need to sync, and we can use the deck tool for that. You can also do it using the Kong admin API or not, but I'm going to go ahead and say deck sync, and the state will be fetched from this new declarative config file. It should update my Kong gateway configuration. All right, I created one endpoint, which means now that if I go back, I can run tests, and it's not working yet. Wait, hold on a second. A request aborted. Why is that? Well, it's not working. This is the problem with live demos. I might be forgetting something on the. Oh, of course. I will need to define, for instance, some sort of body that I'm sending to it, because I didn't add enough configuration to my Kong gateway. So Kong, of course, because it's not exposing the internals of my Dino Park API, it's not going to tell me why necessarily in this case it's failing because I haven't configured it, so to speak. All right, so I added a new endpoint to my API spec, and I'm ready to commit this and push it into its own branch. Let's go ahead and add listen version documents. Notice that it's quite similar, to your typical Git experience. Add, let's go ahead and add this commit message, add security fences endpoint. Let's go ahead and commit. And like with any, typical Git project, I need to go ahead and push. And if I go back to the my DynoPark repo, notice here that it's already here asking me if I want to create a pull request. And this is, this would be your typical GitHub collaboration where I can ask for code reviewers to review my, to review my code and whatnot. That's pretty much it. Now, the major change, it might be simple, but oversimplifying, is exactly give you that freedom to, you don't need to fill out a personal access token and whatnot, is you sync one time and then you can interact with a lot of different Git repositories. You can create other repositories and sync them here with Insomnia. Now, I think we still have a few minutes. So you might be wondering, okay, but this is for GitHub. What do we do for GitLab? As of now, for GitLab, you would still need to follow the old approach, so to speak. It might not be Wills can talk about it in a few minutes, but this won't necessarily be the case in the future. So, for example, here I have, a GitLab instance with a repo and whatnot. I could go ahead here and say that I'm going to clone it. So, for instance, it's going to be, give me just a second. I have here it prepared. I'm going to go ahead and clone from my GitLab instance, for instance. Here I'm going to say the author name is root. The email is ruth@example.com, and the username is root. And of course, you'd have to, have the hassle of defining a personal access token on GitLab and copying and whatnot. And notice here that it's in a similar fashion. It's already exists because I already cloned it here. You're still working with Git Sync, so to speak, but it doesn't give you that easiness that we have right now with GitHub, so to speak. But that's pretty much it from my side. So I'm going to give it back to Wills. I'm going to stop my sharing and see you folks in a second.
Thanks, Philippe. Really appreciate it. Cool demo. Glad it worked. Glad the demo gods stuck with us. So. Awesome. Looks like my screen is lagging a little bit. There we go. Okay. So talking about what's coming soon. So as you might remember, we saw this in the data that we have about merge conflicts are not supported yet. And that's true. Merge conflicts are not supported in Insomnia right now. You have to work around this today, kind of revert your changes, save them over to the side, redo them on kind of the latest head. There's not really ability to rebase your GitHub changes and things like, or your Git changes and things like that. So this is obviously something that is painful to work around, and it's kind of defeats the purpose of this easy collaboration. So we're going to be introducing more Git Sync enhancements over the coming versions. One of the big things is conflict resolution. So improving collaboration, limiting those workarounds. And then on the far right, as Philippe talked about, we want to introduce more services. So GitLab and Bitbucket are the two that we support today, in addition to GitHub, out of the box with the Insomnia existing Git Sync functionality. So you can still use them, but we want to make that setup really easy with those things as well. We'll also be looking at GitHub Enterprise in the future. There are a little kind of more complicated things to dive into with GitHub Enterprise, and we probably will end up charging more for it, or put it in an enterprise type of tier and plan for Insomnia. But that is coming down the road as well. And then we want to also have metadata-free OAS files. As you may have noticed, if you had a close eye in the repository structures that Philippe was showing, a lot of that OAS file was stored in that .insomnia directory that's kind of hidden away in a database. And so we want to basically free that OAS file up and allow you to interface with other tools that may need to interact with an OpenAPI specification file. That's what OAS stands for. And it will also allow you to start with existing files. If you, for example, use your code to generate an OAS file in your repository, Insomnia can just plug into that and start using it and generate a bunch of the requests, and you can write tests and all of those types of things that you saw for the Leap demo. So really excited about these Git Sync enhancements that again are coming over the coming versions. And then just some other features that we have on the roadmap we're targeting this summer, subject to change, but we are really excited about the opportunity to build WebSockets and async API support. This is one of the top requested features on GitHub that's been hanging around for quite a while as an issue, and now as a GitHub discussion as well. So really excited about finally getting around to this for the community. And then also going to be looking at social logging capabilities. So easier, more frictionless sign up or login experience into Insomnia, again, with Google, GitHub, and potentially other providers down the road as well. So yeah, very excited about these roadmap features and looking forward to helping you in the community. And with that, I want to say thank you for joining us today. And I want to turn it back over to Taryn to help facilitate any questions. Thanks.
Yes, thank you both, Wills and Philippe, for that presentation. I do have a question and a reminder to everyone else. If you have any questions at all, doesn't even have to be about Git Sync specifically, anything about Insomnia, please go ahead and add them to the Q&A on your Zoom toolbar. So this is from Christian. Is it accurate to say you cannot sync environment variable config via this feature? If so, is that on the roadmap to support? The reason would be nice to source control, share non-sensitive environment config across a team, just like specs, requests, etc.
Yeah, great question. You can, in fact, sync environments, I believe, and I think that's how Philippe demoed the Kong Gateway environment that he was using as well. So yeah, there are a few different things with Insomnia environments. You can create private environments, which are a flavor of sub environments, which will not get synced. So you can use that to, for example, have access tokens or refresh tokens for OAuth authentication to your APIs, or API keys that you have for your APIs or things like that you want to keep private to you as a user and not share with Git. But in general, you can just add the environment as an object into your Git Sync.
Thank you. And I have another question. Will you be looking at adding Azure repos or any others as a supported Git service?
Yes, thinking about that as well. I think we are starting with GitLab and Bitbucket as the two that we're going to add beyond GitHub, but definitely always looking for more feedback as to what you all are using for these services. So I think you can feel free to reach out to me, or you can go to our GitHub or Slack channels to provide any feedback that you want to see around types of those features or services you think we should integrate with.
So with that, I want to thank you so much, Wills and Philippe, for your presentation today. And I will go ahead and sign off. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day.